Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted that you can all join us for our first presentation in the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute 2026 at the U Lecture Series. I'm Laura Peterson, an OLLI volunteer. The Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Minnesota is a vibrant learning community for people aged 50 plus. Part of the College of Continuing and Professional Studies, OLLI belongs to a national network of Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes supported by the Bernard Osher Foundation. I would like to acknowledge and say thank you to our sponsor, the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. We also acknowledge that the University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It's important to acknowledge the peoples on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with our tribal nations. Today's lecture is called Where Science Meets the Sky: The Evolution of Raptor Care and Conservation at the world-renowned Raptor Center at the University of Minnesota. Our presenter is Lori Arent, the Assistant Director of the Raptor Center in the College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Minnesota. Ms. Arent received her bachelor's degree in zoology from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and her master's degree in veterinary physiology from the University of Minnesota. She is the author of Raptors in Captivity: Guidelines for Care and Management, which has been adopted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as their standard on captive raptor management. I will turn this over to you, Ms. Arent.
Whew. All right. Well, thanks everyone again for your patience as figured all this technology stuff out. As Laura said, I'm going to talk to you a bit today about the Raptor Center and all the important work that we do. So I thought the best place to start is going to be in just sharing for everyone what is a raptor, right? You have to know that before you can know a little bit about us and what we do. So raptors are basically birds of prey. They are carnivorous birds which feed on other animals. And most of them have three main characteristics. So they have a sharp and kind of hooked beak. They have very strong feet with powerful curved talons for seizing prey. And then they also have really keen eyesight. So we're talking about hawks, owls, eagles, falcons, osprey, kites, and even vultures. And although vultures do not really have the strong feet or those curved sharp talons, they do have the other features, and they are primarily meat eaters as well. But they don't kill their own prey, they scavenge, but they still play a very important role in our ecosystems. So I wanted to start also by setting the stage a little bit for how the Raptor Center kind of came to be. So it really came during a time when there was an increased environmental movement. There was like an environmental awareness essentially back in the 1960s and 1970s. And some of you may remember that. Things which happened during that time were the publication of Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring. There was a major oil spill off the California coast, Santa Barbara, where over 3 million gallons of crude oil was released into the Pacific Ocean. That kind of generated a fair number of legislation that happened during that time. The National Environmental Policy was one. Of course, people were also just concerned more about the pollution in the air, and they were worried about the quality of the water that they were drinking. So this led to some other forms of legislation. And then we also have the very first Earth Day, which happened way back in 1970. And then, of course, the Endangered Species Act, which was in 1973. Now, Minnesota is very rich in the diversity of wildlife in which it can host. And that is because Minnesota has 4 main biomes. And biomes are basically habitats. And there are different types of vegetation and land structures in the different biomes, essentially. And so there's a very diverse array of wildlife. And part of that is over 25 different species of raptors that can be supported and seen throughout the state of Minnesota throughout the year. So take all these things into account, and that really supported the Raptor Center's establishment, which was in 1974. Now, the Raptor Center is part of the College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Minnesota. And we are very much a community supported and driven organization. All that I'm going to talk to you about today, all the amazing things that we do, are made possible because of the support of a very generous community who financially supports our work. And we also have a network of over 330 volunteers who work right alongside with us in every part of our mission. So it began, as I said, in 1974. And for those of you who are alumni, some of these names will be familiar. So it started in a few of the research rooms in Hecker Hall. And it was co-founded by Drs. Gary Duke and Dr. Pat Reddick. Dr. Gary Duke was a professor in what was then called the Department of Veterinary Biology at the College of Veterinary Medicine. And one of his grad students, Dr. Pat Reddick, he was also going simultaneously for a DVM degree as well as a PhD. And Dr. Duke had a lifelong fascination with owls in particular. And Dr. Reddick had a lifelong fascination with raptors. He was a falconer before falconry was even a permitted activity. So you can imagine when the two of these people came together and started studying the gastrointestinal system of owls, how it just naturally then progressed into being much more of an organization. So the Raptor Center really started as a research and rehabilitation organization, and then it has evolved into what it is today. We moved into our new building, which is a designated building for the Raptor Center in 1989. And that was in thanks to the very generous contribution of Don and Louise Gabbard. So our building is the Gabbard Raptor Center. So what is our mission, right? Our mission is to ensure the health of raptors and the world we share. And like the university, we do that in three major ways: teaching, research, and service. And there's two components to the service arm, and that is our Raptor Hospital, where we provide medical care, and then our public outreach. I'm going to share a little bit about each of these with you today. So how do we accomplish all this work? Well, we have a team. We have multiple different staff members on our team. We have 23 permanent staff. We have 1 to 2 veterinary interns. We have 6 staff that are on a grant-funded initiative, and I'll be explaining what that is a little bit later on. And then we have a cohort of students and temporary casual employees as well. But in addition to that, as I mentioned, all of the work that we do is only made possible because of our amazing group of volunteers. And as I said, they help us in every single part of our mission. So I want to start by talking about the part of the Raptor Center that is best known around the world, and that is our Raptor Hospital. So our hospital admits over 1,000 injured, ill, and young raptors every year. Now, in the past 2 years, in 2024 and 2025, we hit milestones. We had record-breaking admission numbers both of those years. So in 2024, as you can see from the graph, we had about 1,085. And then last year, we had we had 200 more than that. We had 1,285 patients. So the question is, why the increase? And like many things, we don't think it's just attributable to one factor. Our patient numbers probably increased that dramatically last year. We had a fairly mild winter, right? And that means that conditions are good for the food that the raptors eat to survive. So really good for prey survivability if the winters are easier. That means when it comes to breeding season, one of the factors that typically indicates how successful a breeding season will be for raptors, how many chicks they will actually be able to raise, is the food supply. And if there's an ample food supply, then they're going to be more successful in raising larger groups of kids. Another thing is we'll talk about is that we saw an increase in patients with infectious disease, primarily West Nile virus and highly pathogenic avian influenza, so that contributed. And then we also like to think that the increase is due to an increase in awareness through our public outreach efforts, where people know more about us and how to help an injured raptor if they find one that's in need. We service primarily Minnesota and Western Wisconsin. And we also provide consultations to veterinarians and rehabilitators not only across the rest of the country, but across the world. So we really have a strong global reputation as well. So for those birders out there, I thought it'd be kind of fun to show which species do we see the most of. So in 2025, we admitted 229 bald eagles, 186 red-tailed hawks. Red-tailed hawks are the most common large hawk that we have in Minnesota. 176 barred owls and 162 great horned owls. And what's interesting with this is those are flipped. So usually we see more great horned owls than barred owls. But last year, and I think the year before as well, we started to see more barred owls than great horns. So that's just a real interesting shift that we're going to kind of keep our eye on. And then sandwiched between the two owls is the Cooper's hawk. And this is a bird-eating hawk, which has really thrived in urban environments. So they eat birds, and what do a lot of people enjoy doing? Feeding birds, right? So they have bird feeders. And so basically what they've done in many cases is just provide a buffet of choices for these Cooper's hawks to relatively easily catch their food. So why do we see raptors coming into our hospital? Well, the number one cause of admission is some form of trauma. And a high percentage of the trauma is due to anthropogenic causes or somehow caused either directly or indirectly by people. We see a lot of birds that are hit by cars, any moving vehicle really. So cars, trains, airplanes, that's probably the number one cause of trauma. We also see birds that hit windows. You know, it's not just the songbirds that, you know, you can hear hitting a thud and then you look out and a songbird hit your window. A lot of raptors also hit windows. We see a lot of entanglement happening more and more with recreational sporting structures like spent fishing line, for example, or soccer nets. Soccer has become very popular kind of throughout the US. And unfortunately, many of the nets are permanently attached to the frame, right? So it's not like when you're done, you can just remove the nets and just leave the frame up. And what happens, especially with owls who hunt at night, is that their little prey items, you know, which are a lot of mice and rabbits, they tend to hang out around these nets, especially if kids are eating and dropping crumbs there. And so the owls see them, and where the mice and rabbits can either go under the net or through the holes in the net, the owls cannot. And so they hit the net, they become entangled, and unfortunately, a lot of times they struggle all night long before someone can find them. And then we have the risk of circulatory issues happening where blood flow has been decreased to its wing, or maybe there's a really significant wound there. So it can be a very traumatic cause of injury, and the outcomes are not always positive. So one of the things that we tell people is, you know, if you enjoy soccer, please see if there's any way to remove the nets or tip the nets or something when they're not in use. We also still see a fair number of birds every year that are shot. Raptors are protected by state and federal laws, so it's not legal to shoot them, but we still see a fair amount of birds that have projectiles in them. And then we also see youngsters, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a bit, but are the victims of tree work that's being done in the fall. So a lot of these birds are nesting in trees, and people don't necessarily do their due diligence in making sure that there's no active nest in a tree before they have it cut down or trimmed. So every year we also see several of these young birds who come toppling out when tree work is done. So from a traumatic, from a traumatic perspective, I guess you could say, a lot of times these birds end up with fractures. And so early on in the Raptor Center's history, Dr. Rettig really created the technique for fixating bird bones. And bird bones are very different than mammal bones in that they're very lightweight for flying. They have very thin cortices. A lot of them are filled with air spaces. So the typical techniques of plating a bone, for example, which is used in a lot of mammal species, just does not work in birds. So Dr. Rettig, in collaboration with some others, designed what's called the ESF external tie-in fixator. That's a mouthful, huh? And basically what it is, it's an intramuscular, an IM pin, an intramedullary pin that goes into the bone, kind of into that airspace to keep the bone ends aligned. And then on the outside, to prevent rotation of the bone as it's healing, it's tied into an external bar. And so that's what you basically see. You don't necessarily see the IM pin, but you do see the external bar. And the birds tolerate this very well. And it really helps to provide the amount of stabilization necessary to promote healing. This is a technique that is used around the world still today. Another major reason why we see raptors, especially scavengers like bald eagles, is lead poisoning. So I just wanted to talk about lead a little bit. So lead is a heavy metal that is naturally occurring. It's abundant. It's really easy and cheap to obtain. Those are all the good parts of it, right? However, it is a proven neurotoxin, right? When I was young, I can remember, in the late 60s and early 70s, heading to the gas station and being able to get leaded gasoline, right? And what people realized is that the lead would come out in the exhaust and it would be deposited in our water, in our soil, and then it would move up through the food chain and we would actually get lead toxicity from that source. Now, lead was banned in gasoline. I think it took all the way to 1996 for that to happen. Lead in paint was banned much more quickly. That was in the late 70s. And lead was used in paint to help make colors more vibrant, right? Make white really bright white. And as you can see from the photo there, what was realized pretty quickly is that peeling paint was being ingested by children, right? Kids put everything in their mouth, right? And so it was linked to physical and cognitive disorders, learning disorders in kids. And so we banned the use of lead in paint. And even today, every now and then, you'll hear a story of some, usually it's from a different country, but some imported toys that have lead in them still. And of course, as I said, kids put everything in their mouth. So it's warning against, purchasing those products. So what about lead in the environment? I kind of mentioned what it does to us, but what does it do to wildlife? Well, it is fatal to many different species of wildlife. The ones we most notice are some waterfowl like ducks and geese and swans. Even though they may not, be shot with lead, the main way that they get lead poisoning is from ingesting. So lead shot used to be legal to use when shooting waterfowl over bodies of water. The lead does not biodegrade quickly. It lasts for hundreds of years in the water. So what was spent years ago is still there. So when you get birds that are dabblers, that reach down to the bottom of lakes and rivers, they tend to pick up the lead, which is number one, shiny, and they're attracted to shiny things. And also it helps their digestive system. It acts as grit. Lead is also the number one cause of mortality in loons, in the common loons in Minnesota. And that's from fishing tackle. And so that's also extremely sad. And then, of course, we get to the scavengers, which pick it up from the dead animals they eat. That would include vultures, eagles, and even the California condor, which we're going to talk about as well in a bit. So early on in the Raptor Center's history, we got eagles with lead poisoning almost from the very start. And so we really collected a lot of data, did our research, and really lobbied to get lead banned for use in hunting waterfowl over waterways. And so we thought, woohoo, we're successful in that. This is great. We should see a reduction in the number now of bald eagles that are admitted with lead. And unfortunately, that did not happen. So kind of back to the drawing board to find out what is another source of lead exposure for these eagles. And as it turned out, it was deer. So big game, right? Big game. It was still legal to use lead for hunting big game, and certainly in the upper Midwest, a very large number of deer are harvested every year with firearms. And so there were actually photos taken. Thank goodness for cameras on our phone, webcams, bird cams, right? We really learn a lot. And so one interesting thing is that, we knew that bald eagles are scavengers. We just didn't realize how much lead they were getting from deer specifically. Bald eagles are especially sensitive to lead. It only takes the lead, the size of a piece of a grain of rice in order to kill a bald eagle. So not very much at all. So with the radiograph, for example, on the right, you can see there's a lot of lead in there. We don't always see lead in eagles that are suffering from lead poisoning because it dissolves and goes into their bloodstream. But in this particular case, we did. And this is what a typical example looks like of an eagle that has kind of severe lead poisoning. So it has a distinct respiratory pattern. It's gasping for air. And it's not that the lead has affected the respiratory system, but it has affected the respiratory center of the brain. It's very, very sad. This bird usually, this particular bird didn't have a lot of knowledge of its surroundings. And of course, if any of you have seen a bald eagle flying, you know how majestic they can be and how very sad it is to see them come in this condition. So there was a lot of research that was done at the time that this was all going on when we realized, oh my goodness, there's another source besides the waterfowl. And we, the Raptor Center, assisted with some of these projectile studies. And one of the things we're really interested in knowing is, like, how much dispersal of lead is there from the point of impact until it finally reaches its destination when it lodges. And as I said, that lead is a very soft metal, right? So little pieces of lead essentially are removed from the time of impact until it lodges. So there's actually little pieces of lead in meat that people are eating. And we already know how bad lead is for us, right? There were studies done that looked at the gut pile. So when a hunter goes and hunts deer, a lot of times they're in the middle of the forest. And a typical amount of guts, let's say, for to average white-tailed deer is about 50 pounds. So if you're in the middle of the forest, you got to lug your catch back to your car. Of course, you want to minimize the weight as much as possible. So removing the guts, minimizing, the amount of extra weight you have to carry makes sense, right? The thing is, hunters are supposed to bury their gut piles, but sometimes during deer season, the ground is already frozen. So what they do is they just cover it with leaves and things like that. Well, that's not good enough. And just to give you a perspective on how, what the impact of this can be, there were studies done that showed that about 36% roughly of gut piles actually have lead in them. And so I checked, and last year, 132,000 deer were harvested in Minnesota with firearms, and a similar number in Wisconsin. And if around 36% of those had lead in their gut piles, that potentially resulted in 47,000 point sources of lead in the environment for scavengers to ingest. This is all preventable, right? There are alternatives to lead that are much safer. Copper is one that we strongly recommend. It's a little bit more expensive, but in the overall scheme of things, with the expense of a hunting trip, it's not that significant. So that'd be kind of fun to share kind of this series of photographs really quickly here that kind of demonstrate what happens at a gut pile. So as you can see, the gut pile a little bit off center here on the bottom. That is like the remains. So this is time 0. Then about 45 minutes later, you see ravens came in. Now ravens do have somewhat of a sense of smell. So even if this was covered with branches and leaves and things, they could still smell it. And of course, we all know that ravens aren't quiet. So they then, another half hour attracted several red-tailed hawks and rough-legged hawks. And then it took about 2 hours at this particular site before the bald eagles came in. And a bald eagle can eat, about half a pound of meat at a sitting. And so you can imagine if a gut pile started at 50 pounds, there's still going to be plenty left by the time the bald eagles get there. And then by 3 hours, the gut pile is completely consumed. So if you know any hunters out there, please share this message and encourage them to change their form of ammunition. But lead is not the only way that raptors get poisoned. Another really significant one is through the use of rodenticides. You know those little decon boxes of bait that you can buy at the local hardware store? They are very toxic, and that is how they function in the rodents, is that they do kill the rodents, but it's a very slow death. Basically, it's an anticoagulant, so it stops the blood from coagulating, and these animals just basically bleed to death. And of course, during that time, they're getting slower, and they're much more easier for predators like raptors to catch. And so what happens is you get unintentional secondary toxicity in raptors. And although we don't test for it in every raptor, we do test for lead poisoning in all of our bald eagles and vultures that we admit. We don't test for the rodenticides just because it's, number one, very expensive, and we don't get a timely result. With lead, we get a result within 5 minutes, right? But in the case of the rodenticides, we have to send it out to a lab. So if we have any suspicion, we just go ahead and treat them anyway. Then, as I mentioned earlier, we also last year especially saw a real uptick in infectious disease, West Nile virus being one of them. This is a typical great horned owl that is in the later phases of the virus. And we used to call them, when they first came in, bobbleheads. The virus attacks the nervous system, and you can see how uncoordinated it's basically those head movements. It presents differently in different species. For example, in hawks, the virus attacks the retinas of their eyes and causes blindness. They don't necessarily show the same symptom. We also saw more highly pathogenic avian influenza that also presents, let me see here, neurologically, but in a different way. You can see the little slight head tremors. The bird is pretty unaware of its surroundings. It's down, it's laying down, and it just has that slight head quiver. Now, again, there are different ways that these present, but these are two of the typical ways. So I want to talk just a little bit about highly pathogenic avian influenza because it has really rocked our world. It has changed the way that our hospital operates. So since it really came into light back in March of 2022, we've had over 264 positive cases. So the majority of them have been great horned owls, bald eagles, and red-tailed hawks, three of the most common species, right, that we admitted. And the interesting thing is that we still, even though it is kind of hit or miss as to whether it's in our area, we still have to test every single bird that comes in because it is so highly contagious in raptors and it's mostly fatal. And I'm going to talk more about that when I talk about our research in just a little bit. So another reason why not young, but why raptors are admitted is because they come out of their nests as youngsters for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's natural occurrences, spring storms with high winds, right? That's a big one. Sometimes predators get into the nest and the chicks fall out. So there's a variety of reasons why people find them out of their nest. Sometimes certain species really do make poor choices in their nest selection. And one particular bird is the great horned owl. So great horned owls are the earliest nesters in Minnesota. They start nesting and laying their eggs in January. Oh, bitter cold, right? They're kind of crazy to do that. But the reason they do that is because their kids have a very long parental dependency period. They need to learn a lot of things in order to survive, and they will stay with their parents for 6 months or more. So if they don't get an early start, they're not going to be able to kind of send their kids on their way before the next season approaches. The thing with great horned owls, though, is that they don't build their own nests. They'll use an old crow nest or an old hawk nest, typically, from the year before. They don't even add a stick to it, reinforce it in any way. The integrity of the nest is usually sufficient to support the adults as they're incubating their eggs. But once the chicks hatch and start to move around, all of a sudden the integrity of the nest loosens a little bit, parts of it start to fall off, and then the chicks tumble out. So we tend to see a lot of great horned owls. We've already had several this year, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to show you what some of the babies from last year look like. And as you can see how adorable, I say that in quotes, these birds can be, that can really create problems and that people find them and they want to raise them themselves, right? But it's really difficult to raise them properly. There's a lot of things you have to know about diet and behavior, not even considering the fact that it's not legal for people to have these birds in their possession. But so it's really important that the Raptor Center gets them as soon as possible. What we like to do is whenever we can, we like to reunite these youngsters with their families. You know, for birds that spend so long with their parents learning things, there's no way that we can teach them everything they need to know, but their parents can. So we work with professional tree climbers to climb trees, to rebuild nests. We have a nest building party every year where a group of volunteers prefabricates nests. So when we get a call, we can take a nest and we don't have to spend the time to fix the nest if need be. Can just hoist one up there. As you can see in this photo, this is Jim, one of our longtime arborists who helps us with this work. And you might be able to see there's just the head of a little hawk here peeking out. And that was after he replaced it in one of our man-made nests. So you may wonder, well, how the heck do you get the baby back up there? Well, we basically will put it in a strong, safe container, like this fabric bucket, and then hoist it back up there. And sometimes, as you can see here, it's a pretty significant distance up. And it always surprises me how these birds can tumble out and not get injured. Sometimes they do, but the majority of the time they do not. So I find that just amazing. So when you come to the Raptor Center, you basically are able to get a tour of the education area, but people don't actually get to see what happens in their clinic. So I wanted to share this video of our clinic space, and you can also hear from a couple of our veterinarians.
Every single day at the Raptor Center is different for me, and I think that's one of the parts that's so exciting about this work. The majority of the patients that we see at the Raptor Center are suffering from some sort of trauma, and unfortunately, a lot of those types of trauma are anthropogenic or human-caused. On average, kind of our day starts in the morning with doing recheck examinations of our wild raptor patients that are currently housed in our hospital. So doing any x-rays or physical therapy or wound treatments that they might need as part of their medical care process. So once we get all of the birds in the hospital cared for in the morning, in the afternoon, we usually switch our attention to new patient admissions. So these are wild raptors that have been found on the ground, injured, sick, orphaned, and in need of assistance. And those birds will get their intake examination in the afternoon with one of our staff veterinarians. So that will include a full physical exam, radiographs, blood work samples, and then treatment for whatever their injury is to get them started on the way to recovery. We treat over 20 different species of native raptors, so we are constantly finding new innovative ways to address the needs of those patients. Whether it is an 80-gram little saw-whet who needs a bandage and all of our materials are too thick and we need to come up with something new and lightweight for them, or a 5,500-gram eagle, 70 times as big, who needs a different type of bandage because they are chewing through the thin materials that we have. On the surface, raptor rehabilitation may seem pretty straightforward. You take an individual bird that someone brought to you because it was injured or sick, and you fix it and you release it back into the wild. But it has such a huge impact beyond that. We have the ability to learn about the ecosystem that these birds are coming from, and we also have the ability to educate the public so that we can help keep our raptors as safe as possible and keep them from needing to come to the hospital if at all possible. I hope that our research mission continues to flourish and grow so that we continue to try to find answers to the hard questions of how to ensure that raptor populations are healthy for the future.
So that is a nice segue into another part of our service arm, which is our public outreach. So we reach over 100,000 people every year with conservation messages. You know, each raptor that comes to our hospital has a story to tell, right? Some challenge they faced in the environment. And if we're going to make a difference, we need to increase the public's awareness of what some of these challenges are, because some just require behavior change on our part, and it can make a big difference. We also want people to become better stewards of their environment. But we don't do this work alone. We have a whole nother group of staff that we call our feathered staff, and these are our Raptor ambassadors. And these are birds that are specifically trained to engage willingly with us in our education mission. Many of these birds have come up through our hospital, and all of the ambassadors cannot be released either for cognitive or physical reasons. Now, a lot of the birds just do not have the aptitude to become ambassadors. We're very selective because we want these birds to, as I said, willingly engage with us and have some freedom of choice and control in their lives, right? We want to make sure that they have good welfare or well-being while under our care, because many of these birds will live way past their normal lifespan in the wild. So now I thought it would be super fun for you to meet one of our Raptor ambassadors. So Kelly Scott, one of our, well, actually our lead naturalist, is going to be joining us with an ambassador today. So Kelly, are you out there?
I am there. Do I have to do anything to be visible? I realize.
So if I have the gallery view set up for our attendees,
Mhm.
if you're joining us on the webinar and you want to resize to see our ambassador, you can drag the bar that is appears between Lori's presentation and the gallery on the right-hand side. But otherwise, we see you.
Hopefully people can see us. Hi, my name is Kelly. This is Lois, the great horned owl. Lois has been an ambassador bird at the Raptor Center for about 25 years. Lois also tends to be a little chatty, so I'm going to be competing a bit with Lois. But Lois is one of our busiest raptors here in the education department. Last year she did about 300 education programs for us. And Lori was talking about great horned owl nestlings, and Lois's story really fits in really well with that. Lois was found outside of the nest, picked up by somebody. They kept the bird for about a month and then brought him to us. And unfortunately, during that young period of time, when they were with us, with the humans, instead of imprinting on another owl or on great horned owls, they actually, Lois actually imprinted on the people that were taking care of it. And of course, that's a big problem for Lois. Lois doesn't recognize its own species. When they're hungry, they tend to beg for food, which is what some of this is about. And on top of that, raptors that imprint on humans will look for people for soliciting in the springtime or early when they're nesting to find a mate. So all those things kind of affect the behavior, and that's why a bird that is a human imprint will now go back to the wild. Their behavior just doesn't match what it should do with the other birds of its species. So great horned owls are one of the most common raptors that we see here in Minnesota. We're saying hello, that's very cute. One of our most common raptors here, kind of in Minnesota and probably throughout much of the United States. They're found in a lot of different habitats. They will nest in a lot of different situations. Lori probably talked about they tend to not make their own nests. And so they don't have to find a particular place to nest. They also eat a variety of prey. Lots of stuff on the ground probably, but mice and squirrels and rabbits. But they aren't particular in the prey that they're looking for, so they can find a lot of different things to eat. So I live in a suburb of Minneapolis, and I have seen and heard great horned owls in my neighborhood. So just keep your eyes and your ears out for them. With owls, one of the best ways to figure out if you have an owl around or what kind of an owl it is actually to listen to their vocalization. If you ask a 4-year-old what an owl sounds like, they do a great horned owl. Just a very, very classic hooting sound. Barred owls make a little bit of a different sound, screech owls. So we have potentially like 10 or 11 different species of owls that you could see here in Minnesota or here. But definitely listen for them. Owls, a lot of times we think about being nocturnal. They're out more at nighttime. But this type of owl I actually think of as crepuscular, meaning they hunt more as sunrise and sunset. Now to do that, in addition to having the three regular tools that raptors have, I'll see if I can get Lois a little bit closer so you can take a peek at that. You can see those eyes, great eyes for like finding whatever they're hunting. We have feet with talons on it, very strong feet for grabbing their prey, and a curved beak. That's good for tearing it up. So all of those tools are things that raptors have, and those adaptations, but owls have some that are specific to them. Each group of raptors that we see have some things that are different about them. And one of the main things about owls wanting to hunt at nighttime, they have really good low light vision. So you can see how big Lois's eyes are. Big eyes let in a lot of light. They have a lot more rods on their retina than cones, and rods are good for low light vision. So they have really good low light vision, probably not good color vision, but they don't need that at nighttime. Lois can't move his eyes in the socket. So if you watch, the eyes aren't moving around anyway, but if Lois wants to look in a different direction, Lois has to turn his head. And they have more bones in their neck than we do. We have 7 bones in our neck. Great horned owl have 14 bones in its neck, so really good rotation. Can't go all the way around in the circle if they start from the front. A lot of times people think they can do 360, but starting in the front, they can go over a shoulder, over the back, over the other shoulder, so about 270 degrees. And of course, they can do that in both directions, so they can cover the whole thing. Having those bones really makes their necks really flexible. Owls also have really good hearing. So not only do they need low light vision, but it could be pretty dark outside. There might be snow on the ground. If they want to hunt a mouse running under a bunch of snow, they'll actually use their hearing to do that. And generally people think those things sticking off the top of their head, they look like ears, but they're not ears. They're called tufts, they're feathers. Lois's ears are similar position to what our ears are, just on the side of the head, kind of back behind the eye. So if you see that really dark line, that curved line on the side of Lois's face, that is where Lois's ears are. Really big ear openings, you can kind of peel them open and look inside. And that big ear opening lets in lots of sound, but you can actually open their ears and look inside and see the back of their eye inside of their ear. That's how big their ear openings are. They don't have an ear flap like we do, but they have something else that helps them when they're with their hearing. If Lois will look forward for a second, you'll see the facial disc on the front there that catches sound. It sends it towards their ears, so that also helps their hearing. And when they fly, different raptors have different types of flight. A lot of hawks, soaring hawks will do soaring flight, eagles do soaring flight, falcons fly really fast. Great horned owls and other owls tend to be really slow and quiet when they fly. They want to be able to sneak up on whatever they're hunting. So that's part of it. And also it allows them to use their hearing when they're hunting. So the feathers on these birds, the edge of them, especially the flight feathers, are very soft. The feathers are soft and the edges of them look like eyelashes on the edge, and that breaks up the air and makes it a lot quieter when they're flying. So Lois is, I mentioned, about 25 years old. In the wild, these birds can live maybe like 15, 18, somewhere around there. They can live a little bit older potentially, but Lori mentioned at the Raptor Center, they live quite a long time. So we hope Lois will be here for a while. This is getting to be a little done, so I'll just wrap up in a second here. But I am saying, you'll notice I'm calling the bird Lois. We do name our birds just to help us keep track of them. It makes it a lot easier, but Lois is male and was just named after somebody's grandmother, I think. And so it's kind of an odd name for the bird. These birds weigh typically less than you would think about. They need to be light to fly. So they have a lot of feathers on them. The feathers are very lightweight. They have mostly hollow bones, and that keeps them a lot lighter. So Lois actually weighs less than 3 pounds, which is pretty amazing for this size of bird. All right, well, I think we'll wrap that up and send it back to Lori. Thank you for letting me show Lois to you today.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Now I think I'm probably going to have to, oh no, it's perfect. Awesome. Just hide my meeting controls again and we'll keep on going. So for our outreach, we do charge, so it is a service we provide, but it's fee-based. But we do have two amazing partners who have provided the funds for us to provide our outreach to under-resourced schools. And we do a lot of outreach to K through 12 schools. We also do adult groups, senior centers. We're at fairs and festivals. So that's how we reach that 100,000 number. But really a sweet spot is elementary and middle schools. And so the Environmental and Natural Resources Trust Fund has been a friend to the Raptor Center for many years, supporting many different types of our outreach. And that the current one that we are working on is called Activating Youth and Family Environmental Stewardship Through Raptors. So we go into schools with a couple of our ambassadors and we share different conservation messages. We have a couple of different themed programs that teachers can choose from. And then we also pair that with community events where we encourage the families to bring their kids and learn together to reinforce some of the topics that we talk about in the classroom curriculum that we share. Then we have support from Cargill Foundation to create summer internships that are going to be happening in 2026. And the focus is the ecosystem of STEM careers. So STEM, for those of you who are not familiar, science, technology, engineering, and math. And basically just kind of letting these kids know as they're starting to think about what they're going to do in their future careers, all the different opportunities that are available in conservation. And then we also are having 4 one-week-long workshops, kind of similar to that for middle schoolers. So starting to introduce them early. So we're very appreciative of both of these funders for supporting our important work. So another bucket, if you remember the major things that we did, were teaching, research, and service. And up to now, we've talked about service. The teaching primarily is professional teaching, right? We do hands-on learning where we invite veterinary professionals, again, from across the world to come and work side by side with us in our hospital. We have hosted people from 27 different countries, and we feel we're able to do that because of our high caseload, right? We have a lot of information that these birds are sharing with us that then they can share with our visitors as well. We also have a suite of online courses. Some are self-study courses, some are instructor-led courses. They focus mainly on the medical care, but we also do teach people how to care for and train ambassador raptors. And then we also have some tailored workshops. One thing that I mentioned earlier, and it kind of goes along with our teaching and outreach mission, is regarding that kind of separately supported initiative that we have that 6 of our staff work on. And that program is called Partners for Wildlife. And again, as I said, it's privately funded. It runs alongside the Raptor Center's mission, but it has a very similar mission. It just is expanded. So the mission of Partners for Wildlife is to advance animal welfare or animal well-being during the rehabilitation process to help achieve the most humane outcome. And this, however, initiative does not focus just on raptors, but all wildlife undergoing rehabilitation. So that's where it kind of expands a little bit. The funder supports this work in a 7-state area. So Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, Washington, and Alaska, basically all the states that border Canada. And it has 3 main objectives: to enhance knowledge in the sector, so to provide opportunities for people to grow in their knowledge by attending conferences. And we do mentoring where one of our staff goes out and kind of assesses their needs and helps provide them with resources to improve their knowledge and also to expand their capacity. There are many rehabilitators who do this privately out of their home or they self-fund it. So there's not a lot of money that's basically infused into the wildlife rehabilitation sector. And so this initiative helps to provide a little bit of that. And then also to build community, to facilitate meetings and gatherings and networking, just to really help the impact of wildlife rehabilitation in general. So the final part of our mission is research and conservation. And the neat thing about raptors is that they are an excellent lens into what's happening into the environment. They're what we call an indicator species. And the reason for that is because, as I said, they're aerial predators. They are at the top of the food chain. So when something is simmering, let's say, in the trophic levels below them, and it reaches that level as their apex predator, you know it is making a significant impact throughout the entire ecosystem. And you know what? We're at that same level, right? We're also top of the food chain predators. So that's where the relationship between raptors and humans really can come to light. And this is a really good example of what's called the One Health concept. And that concept is basically that human health, animal health, and environmental health are all closely linked. And I like to think of it as each of these as a leg on a tripod, right? What happens if something, happens to one leg, right? Maybe a leg breaks or it cracks or something like that. It destabilizes the entire tripod. And so that's how I see the One Health concept. And there's some really good examples of this. And this kind of goes back to our early work helping with the population recovery efforts of the peregrine falcon and the bald eagle. So as some of you may know, DDT, a pesticide, is what caused the decline in the numbers of peregrines and bald eagles. Basically, it was a pesticide used in agriculture to prevent, to kill insects that were damaging crops. Little was it forecasted that that would then enter the food chain, the whole food web, and make it all the way up to the aerial predators, the peregrine falcons and bald eagles, and cause such a dramatic decline. And it did that by affecting the metabolism of calcium, so that when these birds would lay eggs, the shells of those eggs would be so thin that they would break when the birds were incubating them. And so basically there was no production. What has not been as widely publicized is that DDT was also linked to an increase in human cancers and diabetes. So again, we put something in the environment which was not healthy for the environment. It affected animals and then eventually also affected people as well. So again, that One Health concept. Now, condors are a little bit different in that the major cause of their decline, or one of the contributing causes, was lead poisoning. And we talked a bit about lead poisoning. The Raptor Center Hospital had the great honor of treating a California condor that broke its wing on the south rim of the Grand Canyon many years ago. It had a wing tag, so that's why it's Condor 350. Absolutely amazing bird, huge bird. And we successfully, so they shipped the bird here, we successfully treated it. It had a fractured radius, which is the smaller of the two bones in its forearm, or forewing in this case. And we sent it back and it was released to contribute to the dwindling population. So talk about making an impact. At that point, every single bird mattered. And we were just so honored to be able to help a little bit with that effort. We also have had our hands in some global collaborations. One that we just completed about 10 years ago was we helped with the rodent eradication that was happening on the uninhabited islands in Galapagos. So the Galapagos Islands, for those of you who don't know, are about 600 miles west of Ecuador. And they are the home to many species which are genetically distinct. They're endemic, they're very unique. And so to preserve the diversity, certain studies were done to make sure that when the rodent eradication was done, it didn't impact the diversity. So why was the rodent eradication necessary? Well, rodents were brought to the islands from ships, and this happened over hundreds of years. And the rodents, of course, as you know, multiply very quickly. And they would actually cause the demise of certain of the genetically distinct species there. Well, an example would be the giant tortoises, right? The rodents would come in and either kill the little tortoises, or they would affect the eggs, go in there in the nest and prevent the eggs from hatching. And so basically there was little to no production of giant tortoises for like hundreds of years. And that's just one example, right? So the only way to do this really was to do what I said don't do, is use the anticoagulant rodenticides. And it was like a nuclear drop of this stuff on the islands, right? You had to get every single rodent or they would just rebuild the population. So where the Raptor Center came in is we work collaboratively with the Galapagos National Park and the Charles Darwin Foundation to help protect Galapagos hawks, which are a unique species of hawks on the islands. And of course, their main diet was rodents. And as I mentioned, when we're talking about rodenticides, it's a slow death. So we didn't want these hawks to die because they were getting secondary poisoning from ingesting the rodents that had eaten this bait. And there weren't a large number of them. There weren't hundreds and hundreds of these hawks. So what we did is we went down, we trapped as many hawks as we could, we brought them into captivity, we managed them while this main rodent eradication process was going on. And then we re-released them into their natural areas. So very successful in the end, very interesting and fascinating project to work on. Currently, we are working with folks in Australia to create a very introductory course on raptor rehabilitation to help increase the capacity for knowledge in that country. Also working with a university in Thailand, their Raptor Center, to improve their knowledge for increasing the care of the birds that they see. We continue more locally here to do work with emerging infectious diseases. As I mentioned, highly pathogenic avian influenza really changed our world. We set up a quarantine so that every single bird now has to test negative before we can move it in with our other patients because it is so highly contagious. And as I said, we saw a very high number, 264, since this whole thing began. And one of the things we wanted to know is, do raptors have any resilience? Are they actually being exposed to this disease and yet surviving it? So a couple of years ago, we started doing collaborative research with Hawk Ridge Bird Observatory in Duluth, Minnesota, where we were measuring the amount of antibodies for H5N1, which is the highly pathogenic form of avian influenza, in the blood. And that would test for resiliency. So that would mean that these birds were exposed, they built up antibodies, and now they're protected. And what's really interesting is that it really depends on the species. We were very pleased to see that, at least from preliminary results, that bald eagles, more than half of them had antibodies. So that means at least half of those birds that we admitted had been exposed and survived. Less so for other species like barred owls and great horned owls, which is interesting. We don't know why. And this research is continuing. And then I just want to end on one final piece of research that we're doing, which is super exciting for us, and that's on post-release monitoring. We, in the past, have a banding permit, so we could put a USGS, which is the United States Geological Survey band, aluminum band on a bird's leg, our patients, before we release them. The only way we would find out what happened to them is if we get a band recovery. So if somebody found them, and most often it was they were deceased at that point, so that they could actually, get the bird in the band and report the band. So really the amount of information we would get would be relatively low. With new technology now and amazing support from our community, we are going to be putting backpack transmitters, GPS backpack transmitters on some of these birds to be able to monitor them and follow them for hopefully a couple of years even after we release them. And we're hoping that we can gain information that'll help us to improve our treatment protocols. Did we do, right in this particular surgical procedure? If a bird had a treatable level of lead poisoning and we got the lead out of the blood, is there any long-term effects of that? The project, or the question rather, that we started with was, we get a fair number of juvenile eagles every year. And as I said, we always try to reunite them with their families. If we cannot, what we tend to do with these guys is we hold them over and we introduce them into a wintering population along the Mississippi River or near Lake Pepin. And so we always thought, well, that's certainly a reasonable approach. We've gotten band returns years later that say, yes, this works, at least for those particular individuals. But there's so much information we don't know. Like, how long do they stay in with that wintering population? Do we have to wait, or do they just head out and they just naturally and instinctually figure out how to survive? So there's a lot of questions, and I'm just showing a little bit of data here. We did kind of start the process by putting transmitters on 3 of our young eagle patients back in January. And we're already finding out such fascinating information. So one of the bald eagles, kind of the first one on the left there, kind of stayed in the general area to start with for a period of time. It did move around a little bit after that, but it generally stayed in that particular area. And this is down in Red Wing. The second bird left almost immediately, and it went all the way down to Iowa, and it hooked up with the wintering population of eagles in Iowa. So it left the wintering population we released it in and went to find another one. Why, right? Don't know. And then the third one, unfortunately, the transmitter didn't provide any information for several weeks, but all of a sudden it came back online. And amazingly, that bird hooked up with an entirely different wintering population closer to the cities. So just from these 3, we're going to get so much cool information. And I just want to share this little video really quickly here that talks a little bit more about.
We had 3 juvenile bald eagles that we released in January of 2026 into wintering eagle congregations along the Mississippi River down in Red Wing. And each of those birds was fitted with a GPS satellite monitoring unit. This gives us more information about exactly what these birds are doing after release, kind of filling in that gap of information of what happens from the time of release to the time where we get a band return. That will help us at the Raptor Center be able to care for our individual patients and improve our techniques. And that is information that we also plan to share widely with the wildlife rehabilitation and the veterinary community. We're learning, we're all trying to improve, and this type of data really gives us the opportunity to fine-tune our techniques and as an industry be able to improve our practices to help our patients have the best opportunity to survive.
So I just want to close with giving you some ideas for how you can help, right? There are things that you can do right now, right? You can encourage hunters, as I mentioned earlier, to use non-toxic ammunition when hunting any animal, but especially deer, such as copper. Something I didn't mention is that you can encourage homeowners to cap their chimneys. Every year we get multiple owls, barred owls and eastern screech owls are cavity nesters. The chimneys look like fabulous little cavities, so they go down there and then they get stuck and they can't get back up. Certainly inquire about potentially removing any soccer nets, that you or your family or your grandkids or your children use when they're not in use. Another one, refrain from throwing organics out the window. Like if you'd be eating a banana in the car or an apple, and you know how I've done it too. You throw the banana peel out or the apple core out. And what that does is that attracts rodents and other predators to the side of the road, which then increases the possibility of the aerial predators coming down to try to catch those rodents from being hit by cars. Another one, remove holiday lights after the holidays. Every year we get at least one raptor that gets stuck in holiday lights that are left in the trees. And then if you're a bird watcher or a photographer, you want to follow good raptor watching ethics. Don't get so close that you're going to disturb the behavior of the birds. And this is especially critical during breeding season. When adults have chicks in the nest, if they get uncomfortable and you cause them to leave the nest, the care of those birds is going to be put at risk. And then lastly, contact the Raptor Center or your local wildlife rehabilitator before taking any action if you find a raptor in need. Many times, especially with young birds, they don't really need help, and we can help you determine that on the phone. Then, if you want to actually get more involved, you can support the Raptor Center or other conservation organizations through financial support, time in volunteering, and also just in sharing knowledge. Right? The more knowledge people have, the better stewards they can be of our environment. If you want to learn more how to give, you can contact the Raptor Center's Development Officer, Courtney Barrett. Her contact information is there. If you click on the QR code, you can contribute to our baby shower fundraising campaign. We will receive over 250 baby raptors this year. And so, of course, it costs significant funding to properly take care of them. So we give people an opportunity to help us in that way. You can subscribe to our e-news just to keep updated on all the cool things that are happening at the Raptor Center. And then lastly, come visit TRC. Come for a tour, learn more about us and how you can support us in our important mission. And with that, I thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori. That was just fascinating. I thank you so much for letting us view Lois. So I do have a question about Lois. We'll start with that one if you
Okay.
don't mind. Um, what was Lois being fed and how often does he eat?
So if the question refers to what was he fed before he came to us, it's what a lot of people feed, and that is hamburger. And hamburger really has a strong imbalance in the calcium phosphorus ratio. And what happens is there's too much phosphorus and not enough calcium, and the phosphorus actually pulls calcium out of the bones, which will result a lot of times in what's called metabolic bone disease. It's also called rickets, where the bones bend, sometimes they break, and then they don't heal properly. So a lot of times we'll see that if people know that raptors eat meat, of course, what's the first thing you think of? Hamburger. Right now, Lois gets more of a natural diet of a mixture of rats, mice, sometimes day-old chicks, sometimes Coturnix quail as a treat. And basically, most of the birds here are fed once a day. Now, if they're undergoing a training session, we will give them like their main meal once a day, but then throughout the day, they'll kind of get part of their meal, right? And just like with other animals, if there's any animal trainers out there, there's multiple short training sessions are much more impactful than a major session. So Lois may get tidbitted kind of throughout the day, and then at the end of the day, she'll get her, or he rather, will get his biggest meal.
Okay, thank you. When you return a chick to a man-made nest, how do the adult owls know that the chick is there?
That's a very good question. And so we've learned over time that we have a window of time. If all of the chicks are gone, let's say, so if one just falls out and one is still there, we have time to get that chick back because that adults or the adults are still taking care of the one chick. If the entire nest is gone, we have learned that we have to get that chick back within 48 hours, or we increase the risk of abandonment. So, they will continue to come back to that site kind of looking like, well, okay, it was here, it's not here. But after about 48 hours, they'll kind of give up. So we know we have the window of time. And then another thing we can do that we often do when we take the babies back, we will make baby calls. So, on some of these phone apps you can get, like iBird Pro, for example, one of the bird sounds for many of the owls is a food begging call of the young. So we can play that at full volume to try to call the adults back in and say, hey, your kids are back. So it's just one of the neat tools that we use.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay, how many raptors are in the Raptor Hospital or Center? Excuse me, how many of them are permanent residents due to an injury?
So we have a collection of 25 Raptor ambassadors. And then in the clinic right now, I think we have 30 patients, and that number will just continue to grow.
So if you end up with more injured raptors that you're able to heal, for lack of a better word, so that you have too many permanent ambassadors, kind of, do you share those with, for example, the Eagles Center down in Houston? Do you kind of farm them out to other programs?
Yeah, so as I mentioned kind of briefly when I was talking about the ambassadors, is we really want to make sure that any bird that we put either into our ambassador bird program or another permanent facilities program is really a good candidate because we really want them to have long-term good welfare. And so we do both a physical evaluation and a mental or behavioral evaluation. We want to make sure that from a physical standpoint, the bird, based on the injury it recovered from, is not going to be in any long-term chronic pain. Arthritis is a big one. We see with wing fractures that healed but not well enough for bird to release. A lot of time, the joints that are close to the fracture develop arthritis, so we will not place a bird like that just to live with an arthritic condition for 20, 30, 40 years. We also do a behavioral assessment. A lot of times, the younger birds, they're a little bit more flexible and adaptable. They haven't been out in the wild as long. They haven't kind of developed their own fears and defense mechanisms yet. Whereas the adults, they're very set in their ways, right? They know a lot just from experience what they have to do to survive. They have a lot of defense behaviors. They know, which things they need to be careful of, and they just don't adapt as well. So unfortunately, some of the birds we do have to humanely euthanize. But we do also place birds with other facilities, yes.
Okay. And do you track all of the raptors that you release?
So the majority of the raptors, except for vultures, do get a metal band on their leg. And I said the return from that is very low. I think it's somewhere between 5 and 6%. So not really significant. We are now just starting to track some of our raptors, and it would be wonderful to be able to track everybody, but it is rather expensive. And so we're specifically focused on birds that are going to help us improve our practices. And so right now we're starting with bald eagles. We also have some funding that we will be able to extend this to great horned owls and broad-winged hawks. So one question, for example, we have with great horned owls is when they lose vision in one eye. Our current practice is not to release them. But the question is, can we release some of them? And under what situations can we do that and still have them survive? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we are just at the tip of the iceberg, and we are so excited to be able to start learning from them in this way.
Okay, so two sort of related questions. First of all, are raptors mated with the same mate for lifetime? And along that mating theme, do the backpacks interfere with mating?
Okay, so the first question. So we get asked all the time, do raptors, quote, mate for life? And they don't mate with each other for life, but what they do both do is they bind to a territory. So they establish a territory as their home base. And then, during migration, right, or even during the non-breeding season, they may disperse from that site. But when breeding season comes, they will go back to their home territory if they're still alive. So then naturally they repair because they're both there again, right? But if something should happen to one over the course of the non-breeding season, the other one will pair with someone else. Of course, there are all these mating rituals, right? That, the male has to attract the female and all that type of stuff. But yeah, it's not like if something happens, they won't continue to mate. They will pick another mate. And then as far as the question about the backpacks, this technology has been used in a research perspective for several years. And it has not shown any ability to impact breeding at all.
Good. Okay. We have one participant who says they've observed far fewer bald eagles on the Minnesota North Shore over the past 5 to 6 years. And do you think that that is a result of the avian flu?
Well, that is the going theory. There's so many things that could affect it, and it's probably a culmination, right? But there were some studies done up at Voyageurs National Park where they would go every year and they would do an aerial nesting survey. So they'd go up in a plane and kind of check the population. They would then go in and band many of the nestlings at these nest sites. And I think it was in, 2024 that they noticed there was a huge decline in the nesting of bald eagles up there. And then it continued last year. So that may definitely be the situation that HPAI really had its toll. The good news is, since we are finding that bald eagles are resilient, at least those that we're admitting, right? Since there's so many bald eagles in certain areas, we feel that they will just naturally move back and repopulate the areas of the North Shore where there's open territories now.
Okay, a quick question for you. You mentioned in the very beginning that the Cooper's hawk can find their prey because people are hanging bird feeders out, and so prey congregate.
Yes.
So should we not hang our bird feeders out?
Well, I mean, that's a question we get asked all the time. And, I guess it's preference, right? I mean, people enjoy bird feeding. And, if a Cooper's hawk is there, comes in and does, take a bird off the feeder, what we suggest is just removing it for a couple weeks because otherwise it'll become a pattern, right? For the hawk, it knows, oh, I just have to go here and I'll get an easy meal, right? So if you take that away, then that bird will go to other areas and figure out how to find food. And you may have to sporadically do that. But as far as taking your bird feeders down permanently, that's a choice, a personal choice. You don't necessarily have to. For example, we have pigeons. My husband has a pigeon loft, and it already happened this year. He lets the pigeons fly out, especially after the winter. They're all, woohoo, happy to fly. And we have a Cooper's hawk that came in and took one. So what we're doing now is we're keeping the pigeons in their coop for a little bit, and then we'll let them out again. It's learning how to balance what people enjoy with nature, right? We all have to live together. And so how can we do that most harmoniously?
Yeah. Okay. Do you share the highly pathogenic avian influenza results with the Department of Health, the Department of Agriculture? How does that get out to the broader public?
Yeah, so first of all, if you go to our website, there is a page on HPAI that we keep updated fairly regularly. And then I do believe when we get positives in, we report them to the Minnesota Department of Health.
Okay. All right. How many centers like the Raptor Center here in Minnesota are there in the US?
Oh, there's probably a small handful that are actually associated with the university, so have that academic component to it. There are several Raptor rehabilitation facilities, more independent organizations that are not affiliated with an academic institution. So we're very unique though in that we have, we do more than just the medical work, right? We use our academic collaborations in order to really work on research because we have all the data collection, we have the backing of the college and all the resources from a research perspective that offers. And then we have a strong outreach too, and we're kind of unique in having all three of those.
What is the euthanization rate at your center?
Well, I mean, so if we look at, the birds that come in, and as I said, so many of them are high level of trauma. So for the birds that survive the first 24 to 48 hours, our release rate is a little over 60%. So sometimes the birds come in and there's no way that we are going to be able to save them. Part of their wings are hanging off or they have a leg amputated or something like that, right? Those result in immediate euthanasia. Then there's some that we try, we feel, okay, there's a reasonable chance and those don't make it. And then those are the ones that we actually will evaluate for a potential placement.
Last question for you. Is the Raptor Center, do they have a way to contact you 24/7 if someone finds a raptor in need overnight or on holidays?
Yeah, so we are open 365 days a year, our hospital is. And if you call the main number, we do have a phone number that you can call. We, due to limited resources, we have seasonal hours where we accept animals. So most of the time we accept birds until 5 o'clock. If we know there's a bird out there that's on its way in, well, of course, we'll make an exception. We, during the spring and summer, which is our busy time for admissions, we will have our phones available till 7. And then after that, if you go to our website, it also kind of gives really good guidance as to what to do if you find an injured raptor, if you need to hold it overnight until you can reach us the next morning.
Oh, good to know. Okay, I am so sorry that we are out of time. Thank you so much. This was fascinating. I also want to thank the audience as always, because your questions never fail to be interesting and lead to other topics and other areas that we can explore further. So that's great. And thank you to OLLI and, of course, our sponsor, the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. Please join us next week, April 9th, for the next presentation in our series, which will be The Power of Ordinary Magic: How Do Children Overcome Adversity with Dr. Ann Maston. So we'll see you all then. Thanks again. Bye-bye.